Hi, my name is Grant Cooley. I am here with Anton Kusser. I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager for the Azure CDN product, and Anton is our Program Manager for the Azure CDN. Thanks everyone for coming. Hope that you're enjoying the show so far. Today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about first, we're going to talk about briefly what is a CDN. There's different ways about talking about a CDN, and we want to go over some of the basics to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language. Then we'll talk about why Azure CDN in particular. There's a bunch of different ways to both purchase and deploy CDNs today, from building your own internally all the way out to purchasing from a pure CDN provider or from a cloud platform like Azure. So we'll talk a little bit about what is different about our CDN from the average CDN. And then we'll talk about what's new. The whole purpose of today is to give you a preview of what the Azure Premium CDN offer is going to look like. We'll do a deeper dive into the new features that are going to be coming with the new offer when it debuts later this summer. This is really our first time discussing this kind of widely and publicly, so we're going to eager for questions from you guys. So we're going to stop when we get into the feature sections at the end of each feature discussion and ask you if you have any follow-up questions to really do a deeper dive into what they consist of. Some of those are fairly straightforward, some are a little more complex. And then we'll give you at the very end of that a couple of the features that we have coming even further down the line. And then at the very end, we'll leave the questions open just generally. So feel free to shoot any questions that you have. Don't feel shy at all about raising your hands. And then to that end, let's get started. Let's test out our hand raising by seeing how many people here feel that they have a good understanding of what a CDN does. Good, good. And how many of you are actively using CDNs today in your own solution? Very good. Let's go a little solution specific. How many are using CDNs for video streaming today? How about for application or CDN or website performance acceleration? Very good. And then how about just your standard static file delivery? You talk about firmware or software updates. Mm-hmm. And how many people thought that they were coming in to hear about something specific to Canada? No, that's good. It's happened a couple times before. All right. So, what is a CDN? So let's talk real quickly about the core CDN elements. We tried to really boil this down. For those of you that are very familiar with CDNs, this may be a little repetitive, but it's good as in there's a colloquial version that when people talk about CDNs, there's also industry terms, so we want to kind of baseline everybody and make sure that they understand where we're coming from when we talk about CDNs. This is at a fairly superficial level, so there's always going to be some variance, so don't get too upset if something in there is oversimplified. CDN has a very high level that's easy to understand, and then boy, you kind of skip that second level and you get deep into the weeds when you're doing configuration. So this is going to be kind of a baseline, and then we'll jump into the weeds a little bit later on. So at its core, CDN involves three elements from our perspective. First is the customer origin server, which is where the customer kind of places their content. The second is the CDN edge network of POP locations, where the customer will point towards his content. And then finally, you have the HTTP client, which requests the customer content via that CDN. The interaction of those and the play from in a circuit is how the CDN kind of accelerates that delivery. And we'll try and stick to these color codes as we go forward. So the common core CDN traffic flow involves those three elements. When a client requests an asset, the check is performed to find out whether the requested asset has already been cached in that POP or not. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll assume that it isn't, so it'll go all the way back to the, if it is, it'll be immediately served up. In the diagram here, we assume that on the first request it is not, so there's no previously cached asset, and the first step of serving this asset is for the POP closest to the client to retrieve that requested asset from the origin server. So once that POP closest to the client receives the requested asset, the next step involves sending it to the client after which it will cache the asset on an edge server. So in the above diagram, you see the client and the first requesting it from the edge network doesn't have it, checks with the origin server sends it back to the edge network, and all the way back to the client. Now, the advantage of CDN is more on the subsequent requests, right? So from there on forward, the client is going to have a direct connection with the edge network. The purpose there is to serve that asset as close to the client as possible. Now, when we say close here, we don't mean, it's often we do mean geographically close, but in realistic terms, we mean network closeness, right? So the network closeness and geographic closeness may not be the same exact thing. So how does a CDN help? So in a normal situation, without a CDN, what you see is a request from a client's computer travel through the regular internet, through their ISP, through the regular internet, and this is generally what is referred to in the industry as the last mile. And I just described it backwards. The first request from the computer, let's just see here. HTTP client to the internet is that last mile. It's called the last mile because we're thinking about it from ourselves to serving the traffic out. That center part where the data is traveling is called the middle mile, and the first mile is that business from the original server to the internet. So what we really do is minimize that round trip and make that middle mile efficient. The biggest advantage there is minimizing that first mile traffic. Any questions up to this point? Cool. So with a CDN, what you're doing is placing the edge network in between that internet connection. So the public internet is not optimized, obviously, for your particular asset travel. We call this the bacon effect. I would normally put up a big picture of Kevin Bacon here, but I think we're a little concerned about copyright infringement. So for this purposes, this discussion, bacon is just regular bacon. So in a normal internet scenario, the relationships between ISPs and networks can be loose. You have various levels of relationships that travel through them. So on the last slide, the middle mile looked very simple as a box. In reality, it is a huge aspect. We think of the internet as actually many networks of loosely combined through a myriad of agreements that connect to one another. Sometimes those agreements are strong and formal, but often they're casual and comparatively weak. When you request a piece of data through the public internet, that request travels through a network of those relationships, often very many of them, hence the possibly up to 6 or 7 degrees of separation, hence the bacon effect. So it can travel in a nonlinear way. It can get from point to point based on whatever the network conditions define at that time, and it's rarely the case that it will be the same, all the way from the original client request out to the origin. Then it's got to come back, and it will come back in the same haphazard pattern. So with a CDN, we call it the direct bacon effect, right? You now have a direct connection between 2 points. So your client will request its data. That data will travel out across the ISP. You've notified the client that you've loaded that information on a CDN, so it's going to go directly out to the CDN. And then it's going to come back. So, oops. In this representation, the purple is the edge network. It's going to communicate directly with a POP that is close to the origin location. It's going to load that origin up, and it's going to serve that asset not only to your end client, but to the edge network closest to that client. It does travel over that, but these agreements are much more curated, right? Essentially part of what you're doing when you buy when you buy a service like CDN is not only are you purchasing access to the hardware that makes these transits significantly more efficient, but you're also standing behind the agreements and the relationships that they've built with all the individual network providers over there. They understand what the network looks like at a particular point in time and will choose the route that is best for your travel. Furthermore, you get the no-bacon effect. Going forward, as we saw on that first or second slide, the information will be served directly from the edge going forward. Subsequent requests to that same content are available from the edge server closest to the end network. Can you bump that forward for me? All right, so when is it good to use a CDN? Utilizing a CDN is a good general practice, but there are always conditions for which it is better suited and those where it may not be ideal. Best case scenario for a CDN is where the content is relatively static. And by that I mean that it's not going to require refreshment over and over again in between being served to multiple clients. Although there are additional services that you can use to mitigate that and allow it to be more dynamic, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And you're looking for situations where the end users are many and at some distance from the origin. So many users, not proximate to the original origin, and can be reuse that data over and over again. When not to use a CDN, very well could be a scenario where the origin itself is actually better suited to deliver to a group of users. So the most common scenario there is where the content is expected to be broadcast to a limited area, particularly close to the origin, where the network hops may not be that numerous. So actual hops, again, may not be represented by that geographic distance. So it's important to do testing on your actual solution to determine what your scenario demands. When we say close, again, we're talking about network closeness. There are a myriad of different ways that the networks are constructed that could result in things that make not a lot of sense as the crow flies. I think one of the biggest examples is in LATAM, where the network connections between each other are not always the best. And oftentimes you'll see a network transit all the way up through Miami and back down, even if the countries are right next to each other.
Would this be a secure VPN connection?
No, it wouldn't be over a secure VPN connection. Still over the open internet, but over a peering or a transit route.
But it could be coupled with SSL,
Yeah.
right?
And the other example, the extreme example of outside of LATAM is China, where a lot of people assume that if you're not using POPs inside of China, that you should serve directly from somewhere just in the vicinity, like Hong Kong or Singapore, something like that. The reality is those transit routes and the peering routes get incredibly congested. China has no incentive to increase the pipes that are coming out. And so we'll find in many cases actually coming out from Miami once again, you can have much better performance. Because if you have a pipe and I'm shrinking that pipe down, everyone's trying to get their data through because it seems to be the cheapest and fastest way. It's not always the best performance. So we'll sometimes have people take a look at trace routes and go, hey, why are you serving out from Miami? It's actually faster than trying to go directly in. Well, yeah, exactly.
And it's often, you get the time zone differences as well. Part of the intelligence built in is that network part of it, where it knows that the Miami pop and everyone in Miami is asleep and everyone in China is awake. It may legitimately be faster at any given point in time for it to travel around the world and come back if the local area is particularly congested. Another scenario where a CDN may not be completely appropriate is transfer of small or single large files to a specific or limited number of recipients. One of the most common scenarios here would be ingesting into Azure, right? You have a single file you want to ingest into Azure. If you're doing that regularly with large volumes, you may want to look at something like Azure's Express Route service, which would give you a direct connection to the data center. If you were uploading files, maybe not to Azure directly, but to point to an individual person, CDN may not be the best solution. But again, we have partners like Aspera who do fast file transfer that would allow that probably a little bit more smoothly. The point generally being, we have a general set of rules which apply to most people, but it's always best to come in and check and test your own system. we have a session tomorrow on performance and monitoring where we'll dive a little bit more deeply into the tools and techniques about doing that. All right. Before we jump into that, any general questions on how we see the CDN from that perspective? Sure.
So what do you see the differences in use cases for CDN versus WAN acceleration?
CDN versus WAN acceleration.
Depends on, I mean, WAN, it's a local, you're doing localized, but what's an example when you're saying WAN acceleration? So we can compare.
Just doing file transfers from, say, we personally have a data center in the U.S. We're doing file transfers from Australia to a data center in the U.S. So we have an accelerator in our data center, an accelerator in, wherever I said Australia, wherever it is right there to, persist traffic to try to help with stuff like that.
So yeah, it kind of gets to what Graham was talking earlier in terms of, there's a tipping point, and I always use, people tend to think of the CDN as this kind of magic pixie dust. I just throw in everything, and we actually see that dramatic effect in Azure because it's so easy to go turn it on, where when we look at this kind of the statistics in terms of the thousands of people tens of thousands of people that have turned on CDN, how many of them are actually doing significant traffic that would have any kind of dramatic effect on what they're doing, and in most cases, they've just turned on small amounts of traffic moving up and down. There's no actual number where it becomes better, but I like to compare it to if you have a few hundred clients that are accessing the content, you're not really maximizing CDN. In many cases, you're adding an extra hop and you're actually slowing things down. So when you're talking about kind of a WAN acceleration, those are typically kind of more long-tail content where you're just trying to move it to a small number of users. CDNs really start showing their power when you get into thousands of users who are there. If you think about the edge of a CDN, each one of those pops is a data center it's connected to a major transit center peering location for the internet. It's hundreds to thousands of servers. When that first request that comes into the edge, you're going to optimize it for the small numbers that are coming in, so there's probably a single server at the edge that's serving it. Now, as you have more and more clients are coming and connecting in, you'll actually see performance start to dramatically improve as that file gets spread across an n number of servers, and then you start serving directly out of memory versus directly off of the disk. So if you try to compare WAN acceleration, probably not ideal for what you're trying to do with a CDN. Now, there can be cases if you're trying to accelerate and there's a large number of clients over kind of simultaneously requesting the content. But yeah, it's kind of each scenario you have to look at case by case and see, will the CDN work for me? Am I just adding something because I don't truly understand what's happening? I think it's just going to magically improve things. And in many cases it does, and then there's many cases where it actually won't improve it. Did I answer the question, or?
And you may want to take a look at the fast file transfer stuff like Aspera has. So in those situations, that's generally more expensive on a case-by-case basis. But if you're only moving a limited number of files, it can really make a lot of sense to your business. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks for the questions. So why Azure CDN? So our current offer has a fairly limited feature set that was set a couple years ago. So what we're talking about today and what we're going to go into here in a little bit is our re-engineering it for the modern work scenario for CDN. Our CDN historically was built in 2009, 2010, mostly to support the Windows Update scenario. About a year ago, we implemented a new architecture which was intended to match the current state of the CDN marketplace. So what had happened in the intervening years had been streaming video and site acceleration had become the more dominant work scenarios. And that's optimized for unknown number of users at unknown points in time, downloading file sizes that are also largely variable or unknown. Our historic network had been built for Windows updates, right, which is pretty much the exact opposite. Known number of users, known file sizes, and total control over when that's going to be distributed. So what we saw was that we needed to make changes to make sure that was meeting the current market demand. So about a year ago, we switched over to a new architecture, which is an underlying network is now a tier 1 infrastructure that provides very quality service to thousands of Azure CDN customers. Now, all of the features that we have today are going to continue to be available, but we're going to dramatically expand into 2 new offers, a basic or standard offer and a premium offer. And the premium offer we'll go into at some length. So the current features, as I said, are organized towards these kind of pillars. We wanted it to be integrated. So one of the advantages Azure has over say, a pure play provider would be the single screen management and your unitary billing and support. It does have some customizations today. Custom domain names, query strings, and then it does provide a significant level of convenience in that it does automatic load balancing, and it plugs in really well with our other services. From a unique standpoint, we feel that these are really the differences that are going to happen from a cloud provider like Azure as opposed to a pure play CDN provider or building it yourself. It's integrated. You're going to have single sign-on and unitary management of multiple services and partner services. You'll be able to control all that. Close integration is being developed or is underdeveloped. It has been developed or is under development with the other Microsoft and Azure services like ExpressRoute, media services, websites, and our mobile services. The goal there is to make that as close to a one-click experience as possible. We don't always meet that goal today, but that's exactly what we're shooting for, make that as smooth and painless as possible. Support is obviously huge. We stand behind all of our services, and you know where you can reach us. Single point of contact, allowing for quick and more efficient diagnosis and resolution in these complex scenarios. And then you also have access to all of our partners, right? Billing is a huge convenience, right? You can track all of that alongside your other services. It's a lot easier when you're building deployments for your customers if you can manage that a lot more simply on ours. Long term, we are looking at implementing many different advantages to being a portfolio provider. One of those you'll see is that we expect to be able to build different services in parallel, right? So you'll have different flavors of CDN available and be able to manage those. So what's new? Any questions on any of that?
One thing I should point out, one of the last points on there was around no commitments, which is can be taken one of 2 ways. So when you use the CDN, you don't have to tell us how much you're going to use, but the reality is if you expect that you're going to push through large amounts of data, if you want the optimal experience, you should reach out to us too. We usually look at if in the North America, Europe, if you're going to be pushing more than 25 Gbps throughputs at any peak periods of time, come ask us to make sure that the POPs are able to do what you do, or that we can, in many cases, we can adjust and shape the traffic around to take that into account. So once again, it kind of gets back to my comment around the magic pixie dust. We also think of the cloud as this completely flexible, will just handle everything. Well, there are realities, because if you have 100 large customers who just want to push through massive amounts of data, it's going to bump up against each other. So similar to everyone's trying to shove everything into China today. So the 2 points we look at are in U.S., North America, Europe, 25 Gbps, and then as you get out into Asia, we like to take a look if you're doing over 10 Gbps in a particular country. In most cases, we can handle it, but it kind of depends on what your loads are and when you're gonna push it through. So, and it kind of segues into, once again, a pitch for tomorrow. We'll go in more depth in terms of performance aspects and how you consider it, and how you can be use the CDN correctly, as opposed to just trying to use it as a funnel. You're just trying to throw through data as quickly as possible.
Danny, do you bring? Oh, go ahead.
So, what limitations do you have on the point of origin? Like, we're using Kaltura for video. It's on the cloud. It's on their data center. Can we still use Azure CDN with, an external origin?
In about a month. So you can today if you reach out to us. So we have the ability to We have a CDN supplemental portal where on a case-by-case basis we can expose the advanced features that Grant's going to walk through. We do for a limited set of customers, we do provide that for them today. So we just haven't made it generally available to everyone. So if you reach out to us separately, we can go set that up for you. We'll be updating in the May-June timeframe the existing Azure portal so that it supports any kind of origin. So you can put in any HTTP URL that you want. When you're going back to your origin, you'll be able to, so as long as it's HTTP or HTTPS, you can use any port you want going back to your origin. That will be supported very shortly.
There's a couple of high-level philosophy points that are behind both of those things that Anton was just talking about. First, on the no commitment, and the way that we present these offers is intended to be for people who are making these kind of platform purchases, right? We understand that we have, there's a massive amount of Azure services and there's a massive amount of Microsoft services. So we try and streamline that experience as much as possible. So these are intended to be bundles, which will come at a specific per gig price, right? Rather than some baseline traffic and then a bunch of additional services added on top. So it's intended to be for the pay-as-you-go customer to make that as simple and as straightforward as possible. And then on the point of external origin, I think you've seen the shift that Microsoft has had in the last year or so. It's really an important point from Satya on down that we not be limiting what it is that allows you to do your business. So, opening up to any external origin is one aspect of that that's incredibly important, right? We want you to be able to get what you need from us, but not feel that you are tied to any particular part of what we do. So that's a huge, huge important part. It's going to be one of the first things that come out of this features, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. I saw a hand in the back.
Right now, the CDN is tied to the cloud.
It's tied to, so today it's tied to, you can do a hosted service, you can do Azure storage, you can do websites, you can, and then also if you go to media services, we tie in from the, directly from the media services side to Azure Media Services. So those are the four. And then May, June will allow you to put in any URL that you want.
And I think, as I mentioned before, that kind of integration and the smooth integration of that will extend even after we open up this external origin. So we do want to make it as smooth and simple as possible for you if you're using another additional Azure service. But we don't want you to feel limited to any of those. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks for those questions. So what's new? Here's the current offer landscape. We just talked about it. These are the things that are available today. You'd think I could. It is ironic that I continue to talk about how awesome a one-click button would be, and then I can't manage the one-click button I have in front of me. So today, currently, we have access content from the Azure Origins, as we just talked about, the query strings that we talked about, custom domain names, that single stream management, enterprise class, billing support, and then that inherent load balancing. What's coming up next is we're going to split our service into a standard CDN service and a premium CDN service. So you're going to get all of the stuff that you got before, but we're going to add the access to content from external origins. We're going to include content purging and loading, country filtering, origin shield, a basic rules engine in the standard package, and a more advanced rules engine available in the premium CDN package. Basic analytics will be included, and more advanced analytics will be available in the premium CDN package, as well as token authentication. A standalone coming soon is going to be our SSL, custom SSL support. And then coming a little bit down the line is advanced security, which is basically your web application firewalls, and support for advanced dynamic content. Standalone means it will, so as I mentioned, we're trying to make these packages be as consumable as possible. So standard CDN will be at a flat per gig rate, premium CDN will be at a flat per gig rate, and then custom SSL will have a little uplift above that.
Pretty much everything. Now, we'll try to guide people more towards, or away to an extent from you actually providing your certificate, where we'd actually manage it directly. just more secure. You don't have to worry about, I mean, you can be your own domain that you want in your own custom domain, but it's more secure in terms of every 2 years or when you got to renew your certificate, we'd handle that automatically. If there's any kind of security issue, we can easily update everyone's certificates at the same time. But we'll pretty much have every option that you can think of.
You're also going to offer people that are using current CDNs some way to migrate their existing rule sets?
Depends on the rules. And it depends. I mean, the interesting thing about CDN is, regardless of what we present as, here's our advanced and our kind of standard offerings, there's a lot of custom work that can be done, rules that can be written for customers. So today we're just going over kind of the basic set of things that can happen, but there's a lot of complex where you could actually have on the CDN where you could actually have, if you're doing authentication at the edge, where you could actually going back to your origins and have a workflow that involves callbacks to your origins. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. We haven't seen any customer from a large CDN that we haven't been able to migrate over. But it's going to be case by case in terms of what would it take to move over, and it depends on what you're using. So, and then the other thing to always consider when if you migrate a customer is don't expect to do it overnight. And by that I mean you don't want to blow away your cache. So typically if you set up your rules, you have the same configuration, you slowly migrate the content over so that, if you switched overnight onto a new CDN, you're going to be filling that cache in the CDN again. And you can see issues where your origins start getting pounded a little bit, or the performance goes down slightly until you're actually prime all the POPs for your client requests.
But what we've seen in the CDN industry is that it was, established in a different time when this kind of flexibility wasn't the norm. So it's very difficult for it's very difficult for anyone to map features from CDN to CDN. At the end of the day, most of them have a way to provide the same output. And what we really need to do when we've migrated existing customers onto us is trying to figure out what their end result is, not necessarily have to match exactly feature to feature. But we recognize that as a pain point, and what we've tried to do is standardize as much of that as possible. Over the next few years, we've already seen them started to make the conversion over, right? A lot more API-driven stuff, which frees us up a little bit more to try and make that feature map switch over a little better.
So I keep hearing you guys say that you work with migrating from existing clients. Is this something that you foresee needs some type of professional services that at some point people are just going to do this themselves?
Most of you can do yourself. When Graham was talking about last year, and this is around the April timeframe where we moved off of the old infrastructure, there was a lot of migration going on because we completely moved everyone off an old infrastructure that was multiple years over onto the new one. And in that case, we just handled whatever migration needed to happen. But it really depends on if we, as much as possible, try to make it self-provisioning so that you can do it yourself. But there are workflows where we would need to have some kind of professional services involved to move it over. Really, we'd have to see exactly what that workflow is. So it really depends. I mean, assume that if you went to one of the other big CDNs and it took them a month or two to get you set up, self-provisioning might not happen exactly the way you'd want it to. So
we're very familiar with the pain point, right? See, in addition to being a provider, Microsoft is also one of the biggest CDN customers on the planet, right? So all of our individual divisions, in some cases, utilize multiple versions from different providers. So we often have to see how to balance between multiple CDN providers. Multi-CDN is becoming the kind of standard for the large deployments today. So what we're seeing is more of a willingness for them to not feel that they have to lock into a specific provider. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you for that question. All right. As we talked about external origins, we talked about this new philosophy of Microsoft where it's important for us to ensure that you can utilize our services as your business dictates, right? Not as our business dictates. We very much want you to feel that you can use your own CDN in a manner that best supports your own solution. And that means we don't want you to have to be tied to any other additional services if you don't want to be. We certainly work hard to make sure that if you do want to use those services, the experience is as smooth as possible. And as I said, I think our goal is to get as close to a one-click integration of those other services, one-click deployment of CDNs with those but we're admittedly, that's far from universal. We talked a little bit about external origin already. But if there are any other questions, I want to stop at the end of each feature slide and make sure that everyone gets their questions answered. Anything on external origin? No practical limitations once it's deployed. What's basically just drop the what's going to be the interface for connecting to an external origin?
Just a drop down where you can put in any kind of HTTP, HTTPS or also.
Yeah.
And what we've seen for the large amount of customers using external, it's around from their own data centers, sometimes from another cloud provider. And kind of the beauty of Azure for so many of its services is, or all services, just how easy it is to use. So if you have an existing CDN provider, it's very simple to kind of take a portion of your traffic, light up Azure CDN and try it. And about a month from now, there won't be any limitations in terms of what origin you use that from.
Common scenarios we see is when people want to maintain strict control over their own content or update it regularly. They might have unique content policies, or as Anton mentioned, the move from on-prem to the cloud often starts with content delivery networks, where it's the easiest piece for some people, it's the easiest piece to carve off of their core services that they have on their own premises. So we want to make sure that they can continue to operate everything else the way that they have, and take just advantage of the delivery options if that's what they want. Even other clouds, is if you have a deployment or a solution on a different cloud provider, we want to make sure that you know that it's not going to be disrupted. Purge load. CDNs distribute content as close to your customers as possible, but that creates many copies, right? So purging has become an important aspect for making sure that your content is as fresh as possible. Especially when you're monetizing off that content, you want to make sure that you've spent all this time getting it prepared, that you can get it out there as quickly as possible. This will allow you to manually flush that content and refresh, so that you know that you're not getting old material served to your end users. Some common scenarios are updated news articles or videos, pricing page errors, which we have some experience with, offensive content that you didn't anticipate to be offensive, and occasionally bad objects causing issues. One of the first steps you want is to make sure that you can flush that and see if that is the source of your trouble.
So the one thing that should be called out, people can tend to abuse purge. And by abuse, I don't mean you can throw as many kind of purge requests as you want, as you want. But you need to understand what it means when you purge, and you're purely purging it from the POPs on the CDN. Now, there can be downstream from the CDN, there can be other kind of, caching that's happening at the edge of an enterprise, and that's not going to get rid of that content. So best practice is always to, if you're starting afresh, is use versioning so that you change the versioning for a file, the CDN will pick it up automatically. You don't need to purge. But we understand some people have older architectures where they can't get rid of kind of some bad practices in terms of how they developed it. But if you're starting from fresh, don't abuse purge, because you'll still have people, some subset of people coming back and say, I'm still seeing your old content, and everything can be gone from the CDN, but you have something downstream from that still caching it. So, and then load's another kind of one to touch on, is that there isn't a need by default to use load. We typically see customers using load where they are going to have a massive amount of requests that are coming in. They want to ensure that the data is sitting at the CDN to begin with, so they can truly limit the number of requests that come back to their origin to check if there's a refresh or new content that's needed. But by default, if you have a large number of customers coming in most cases you don't need load. It's the individual POPs themselves will come back and request it from the origins, and then cache it at the edges.
Cool. Any purge load questions? Pretty straightforward. Country filtering is also fairly straightforward. So there's any number of scenarios where this would be available. This gives you a lot of control over what that kind of access looks like at a country per basis, and you could have any sorts of legal or business requirements that you would want to have to keep that content controlled within certain countries. And the new Azure CDN will allow you to control that and dictate where it goes or doesn't go. Common scenarios are pretty obvious. That you want to constrain viewership of videos to accommodate some sort of licensing requirements is one of the ones that we see a lot. And then also blocking content for compliance or even just economic decisions. Any questions on country filtering? Also pretty straightforward. Origin Shield. So Origin Shield allows you to be, allows for even more optimization and utilization of that edge network. In this case, you are utilizing an edge origin server instead of your original origin server. So you tell the network that you have content that you expect is going to be hitting your origin pretty hard. This will allow you to distribute that a little quicker, reducing the amount of round trip time. This is really just an accelerated version of or an advanced version of the basic function of a CDN. And this will be included with both the standard and advanced packages. Any questions on Origin Shield? Cool. Rules Engine. Rules Engine is a really, really powerful tool. There will be some basic preset rules available in the standard package, but the really powerful version of this is the advanced rules engine that will come in the advanced package, the premium package. It's an interface that allows you to create custom rules. It's very, very deep and rich, almost bordering on programming. It's a bunch of if-then questions that allow you to kind of dictate what your specific distribution requires. We see a lot of special timing rules for content and very, very unique behaviors for what happens. I think we see a lot of this. It's tied often to our token authentication, which we'll talk about in a little while. What would be the most common scenario that you would see someone using a rules engine under?
So yeah, one of the most common ones is kind of controlling the caching behavior, both at the edge or going down to the client. So kind of one of the ways to think of the rules engine is you're changing behavior based on a particular match, and that match is anything that comes in the client request. So it can be in a header, it can be in the URL itself. You could be looking at the URL, and in the basic kind of rules package, you'll be able to kind of do wildcard lookups across that URL. As you get into the advanced rules engine, you can start doing regex comparisons on the URL or inside of a header. But kind of anything that you can think about changing behavior, whether it's I'm changing the caching behavior, I'm going to redirect content, whether I want to identify, there's a rich, in the advanced rules, there's a rich ability to identify the exact device that's coming in, which type of Android device or iOS device, and then you can redirect or change how content is sent down to clients. Most CDN providers have something like this. They often hide it back behind a consultant, so you'll have to pay someone to come in and do the setup. We are exposing this to allow for your own self-control of it. I think it's going to be one of the more, it's going to be one of the richer features that are available, and you'll see the true power of it. I think that in the advanced, there's almost no limitation to the amount of permutations on an individual rule. Any questions on the rules engine? Cool. All right, analytics. Today, our analytics are very, very, very limited, almost non-existent. They are non-existent. Billing is our analytics today.
That's right, yeah. You can see what you've used because we need to charge you for it. The new analytics package is going to be very rich. We'll have a core set that will be available in the standard package and a very rich set available in the premium package. With these logging and analytics, you can see where your customers are and how they are or aren't being served. You can use this information to tune the CDN's behavior for your own, especially in conjunction with some of those others like the rules engine. Common scenarios are common scenarios for any analytics. You probably want the details, which are in the basic package. You can get stuff like number of hits, the bandwidth that you're consuming, data transferred, and the cache hit ratio. And you can divide that up based on a period of time, day, week, month. In the advanced section, which is where it gets really interesting, though it opens up more real-time analytics, so you can check and see what's happening at that exact moment. Tied into that real-time analytics are a rich set of alerts, customizable alerts. You'll be able to set up triggers, parameters that will send you emails when certain things are happening, if you cross a bandwidth level or if your cache hit ratio drops below a certain amount. Anything that can be tracked for the most part, you can set up an alert on. It'll also give you a lot of detail on what the top scenarios are, what your top countries and cities are, what your top files are, the top agents, user agents that you're seeing, and error types. Any questions on analytics? Powering through this. Token authentication. Token authentication is a fairly rich feature that's easy to explain, but usually inspires a lot of different questions. So the token authentication basically allows for a token to be used for access to resources over a limited or defined period of time. You can put additional restrictions on top of that. You can base that on a number of different functions, everything from user IP to URLs, protocols, or the individual countries that are in there. We see this almost all the time in media streaming, where they want to control who's accessing their video files. We get a lot of it on firmware downloads, where they want to check and make sure that the person has the right to that download. There's a lot of usage in hot linking. This is a big way to prevent that. Oftentimes, we've seen it in a number of our customers that they didn't utilize this, and somebody hot linked to their content deep in their URL, and they now somebody's got their picture out on somewhere else. This happens a lot with your viral videos. That can really jack your traffic rates up. So, and then you can always use it for customer demographics as well. Really a key component, becoming almost ubiquitous in most of the things that we're deploying today.
This is an example also. There's an earlier question on, how easy is it to go from one system to another. So if you're doing kind of basic token authentication, the way that you're doing the token authentication on the client is likely different as you go from one CDN to another. There's no standard way in terms of how the tokens are created today. But we're just kind of touching the surface in terms of what you can do here in terms of just kind of applying the token and then having the CDN validate it. So typically the client will go into some kind of authentication service, get the token with the URL with the token on the end of it. It's usually time limited. And then some of the additional restrictions Grant said. But there's also the ability, if you needed to, where we could do custom work where you could actually, the POP itself could go back to your origin to do additional validation. So, and we'll see that more in these really large download scenarios.
Tie these things together, they really become a powerful tool, especially token authentication and rules engine allows you to have a really deep control over your own content.
The token authentication is very different from the key vaulting in Azure.
Correct, yeah. Key Vault's about storing your secrets in a secure manner and then be able to hand them out to others in a secure manner. The thing about a token is it's basically, if you look at an URL that has a token on it, you're essentially basically seeing some kind of hash with some clear information to clear also in the URL that comes through. Your authentication service will create it. It will hand the client that URL with the token on it, and when it comes back onto the POP itself will recreate the hash based on info that's coming in on the client, compare them, and if they match, then we'll let it go through.
Any other questions on token authentication? Go ahead.
Does it mean that I can generate a token for my application and validate that token in the CDN?
Correct, yeah. So we'd provide you code and samples for basically being able to generate that token, and that's the same code that the POP on the CDN is going to also validate it with. So.
Will that cause any problems with like Google or Bing crawling side?
Not that I can think about. What do you like? What kind of problem you?
I've got a website with a lot of images on, but I want to make sure that those images aren't being deep linked by another realty company.
Right.
But at the same time, I still want that that indexed and everything else so that people can search it when it goes to my site.
No, because it depends on how you implement it. You can implement it so it does have an impact, and so you're going to require that someone, because you can restrict who can get that URL. So you could basically authenticate when someone comes in, or if you want to treat it just like you are, where it's like, hey, I want to ensure that someone isn't deep linking. If I look at their refers, they're always coming from my websites, and you can do it in a more lightweight manner, where you just basically you're creating the token for a limited period of time. And the simplest one is I create a token, I just say it expires within 20 or 30 seconds, so someone can't grab it and toss it into someone else's site and deep link from there. In that case, if you're looking at analytics from Google or others, it's not going to have any impact on that. But as you get into more complex implementations where you could restrict it based on not, I give you a token and I give you a time period where it's valid for, I could also say, I'm only allow for particular IPs. In that case, and then you start blocking, but you're doing that on purpose. So it really depends on the use case scenario. When you say how can it be configured? So basically, you're basically going to put a timestamp in there that defines how long it's valid for.
You can do that at a granular level. You could combining that with IP address, combining it with.
Yep. Yeah. So the most basic one is someone who's like, I just hand you out an URL token. I might say it's valid for. A lot of times we'll see, it's valid for like half an hour. So something where someone grabbed it and started tossing it out to lots of people, it's now invalid. And then you can start layering on top in terms of you can put geo restrictions on it also. So if the request comes in, I know all my users are from the U.S. and suddenly someone hands it off to someone in Europe, I can block it based on that. So even on, it's half hour valid, but if I toss it over to Europe, it's no longer valid. So it's up to you how you want to do it. So.
Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you. All right. Custom SSL.
I think we hit this one in depth.
So the reality is that we live in an age now where all content is moving from HTTP to HTTPS. I think we're kind of in the last days of being able to deploy content at scale without some level of security attached to it. So while the economics of purchasing SSL may not have caught up with that, they certainly will. Our intent is to make SSL as simple and easy as possible. So we're going to enable this. I mean, the common scenarios are basically everything, but you really just need to secure your content. Keep people out of it. It is becoming the number one request for any CDN provider. There is a great variety in how they provide those. So we're looking to make that as a smooth an experience as possible, because we believe that if you have it available, you're going to be much more satisfied with the level of service as well, your customers. What was I going to say? Custom SSL, security. Security, we're in this phase of, CDN went through this growth phase, right, where historically it has been very much focused on what it's named for, content delivery. We came out of this phase in the last few years where it was starting to address the new nature of websites in dynamic content, right? So a lot of the focus of the CDN industry in the last few years has been to be able to support dynamic content and how that content is delivered and interfaced with. And now we're towards the end of that, where a lot of that has become settled, and now we're looking at security. So we're kind of in this security phase today, and I think that a lot of the advances and a lot of the discussions you're going to see around CDN are going to be heavily security focused on not only now at this particular point in time, but for the next couple of years as well. And on that point, any questions on custom SSL? Cool. Coming soon. So on the tail end of what I was just saying, these are going to be some cutting edge features that we think are a little further out than the last group of features we discussed, but are hugely important to the modern CDN workload and are a top priority for us to get out the door. We've put the fundamentals in place from an engineering perspective, and we're simply working on how best to implement them into our existing offerings and our new offerings. So look for more details on these later in the calendar year, but we want to give you a quick sense of what's coming down the pipe. So as we talked about, security has become an incredibly important aspect. And a CDN inherently provides no small amount of security, right? It has, in addition to the protections we talked about with SSL, the nature of a CDN itself, distributing its content over via replication across worldwide servers, and limiting the number of hits on an origin, it naturally provides some level of security against DDoS attacks. And that can be enhanced by using a service that's already watching it for you, right? The CDN is paying attention to DDoSs for you, so it's standing in front of you. The service already defends against the direct-to-origin DDoS attacks by forcing all of those requests to go through the CDN. So the CDN's monitoring, tracking where those IP origins are, and making sure that only authorized IP addresses can reach your origin. So you get a level of protection simply by using the CDN. Now that's inherent, that's not this. So this is the more advanced security. This offers a significantly more rigorous defense, primarily through web application firewalls, right? Or WAFs. WAFs have been an increasingly important security service over the last few years. Traditionally have been deployed on the customer's on-prem servers and have involved complex customizations to kind of support the applications they protect. By contrast, the WAF deployments in the cloud offer the ability to simply turn it on and utilize existing rule sets that they see as valuable based on the traffic they're already witnessing. It's got the on-demand scalability, so you can turn it on when you feel that you have content that is requiring of protection. It has those always-on capabilities, and it's got that swift time-to-market benefit. So our CDN is going to offer you this affordable, CDN-integrated, always up-to-date solution for protecting websites and increasing their performance. So it delivers that via kind of a broad set of rules that we curate and we subscribe to services to curate. And it combats a whole wide range of possible attacks. So you'll be able to utilize the intelligence that they see by seeing these things happen all day, every day. You don't have to anticipate what specifically you're going to see.
But it's not magic pixie dust.
It's not magic pixie dust.
The stereotypical example usually used for WAF is around SQL injection. So you can protect it from your origins, but you can set very basic rules from the edge of the network. And if the CDN is the edge of the network, you can see that and you can prevent that traffic from coming through. So, and the magic pixie dust kind of aspect is there are certain things that are really easy to detect. There's other things where a lot of customers want to actually see and then, and get alerts and then make changes based on those alerts so that they're not breaking their websites just because the heuristics are slightly off or they're detecting something that's perhaps not a security threat.
Yeah. There are stoplights and stop signs out there and airbags and seat belts, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get in a car wreck or not going to get hurt. So that's security. That kind of touches on the advances that we're seeing in the CDN industry. So this is one of our important things that we want to get out the door as quickly as possible. We're targeting end of the calendar year. Dynamic content support's the other aspect. This platform kind of specializes in this HTTP, HTTPS delivery of data that can't fully leverage the data delivery efficiency derived from caching content because the content itself is changing. The common scenarios here are e-commerce, where people's pages are changing dramatically, or they're trying to retain a certain amount of things. Social media and financial. It's typically database or user-driven, so it changes all the time, and you need a special kind of service to make sure that that content is being refreshed at the edge appropriately, and you're still able to use the CDN in the most efficient manner possible.
So this one kind of goes in juxtaposition to my earlier comment around like when should I use it? Because hundreds or thousands of users. In your typical case for kind of dynamic site acceleration is that you are not caching on the CDN. So you are improving the routing, you're improving how long the TCP connection is kept open. You're just making it very fast to go from the origin down to the client because the client, it's unique. And so there's these two layers where you can make a lot of improvements on the networking side, and then you can start making a lot of improvements at the edge. The edge improvements are interesting because they're ones that in almost most cases you could do from yourself from the origin. Those are things, if I write a web page and I take a look at like how many TCP connections, how many round trips happen if they're hundreds or thousands, well, I could optimize my pages themselves to make it faster. But what we found in a lot of enterprises is that it's very difficult. You have multiple business units who are all contributing to the same front page, and it's just very difficult for them to get something that really reduces the time. So by doing it at the edge, you can start doing smarts in terms of if you have bulky JavaScript, you can reduce it. There's a lot of minimization activities that you can do. If you have a banner on your web page which is made up of like 5 or 10 different images, the CDN can request it from your origin, but when it sends to the client, it can send it as a single image. There's a whole host of kind of optimizations that you can do to speed up the delivery of content for dynamic content directly to the clients.
And they're unique optimizations as well, which is one of the aspects of the services that is going to ultimately be tailored to your specific solution, and that's how it's going to be able to optimize that content. So there's going to be a level of learning and application and settings that need to be addressed, and that's part of what we're trying to solve with getting implemented into our service. Any questions about dynamic content support?
About HTTP2 as far as that optimizing and delivery.
It's also around the corner, as it only went to standard at the beginning of this year. There's been work ongoing for that, but it will be there, but I'd say it's a little bit further around the corner. It's going to take some time for the ecosystem actually to support it across clients versus just the networks themselves. So.
Any other questions? All right, that's pretty much it for the features that we wanted to discuss. We did want to open it up for any general questions, anything that we hadn't touched upon, or any general questions you might have for us. Go ahead.
Question on changing the representation of what you're serving up. Is there any use cases that either are available now or in the future where you would essentially take what the use case of I've got XML and I want to transform that XML into some specification like HTML? Would the CDN be able to help out with any of those kind of use cases?
Theoretically, yes, you can do whatever you want at the edge. This year, it's not a focus that we're doing right now. So the focus for us in the next year is really around just kind of optimizing existing content. There's some tweaks that you can do, but I want to have a logic at the edge. You're basically, once again, moving. I always think of the CDN as this kind of amorphous. It's like you can do anything at the edge, anything you can think of doing. It's just when it happens. A few years ago, the kind of CDN industry, the big move was around kind of the site acceleration side of things, dynamic content. The most recent kind of move in the industry is around the security at the edge. But I can easily imagine the future where there's a lot more smarts at the edge where you're doing transforms. But there's a balance there because you don't want to do a lot of expensive operations at the edge. Otherwise, it becomes it's balance in terms of do I do it at the origin or do it at the edge. So not something that's available right now, might be something in the future.
Any other questions? Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
So say, in terms of cost, what's the difference between serving content at a CDN or directly from Azure bulk storage?
The standard package should be generally comparable to the transfer rates that you'd see. And then there will be an uplift on the premium. Pricing hasn't been finalized yet, but it's not going to be exponential.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is if I'm storing stuff in bulk storage, I'm paying storage transactions like every request.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it's at the CDN, I'm just paying for the storage.
So if it's at the CDN, so let me rewind a little bit. So if you have content that's in Azure storage today, you're going to pay a small amount of money to go get it up to, or a small amount of your traffic is going to be in delivering up to one of the POPs. We'll typically see when we talk about the cache hit ratios, it's basically the ratio of how often are you serving directly out of cache. So for content that is widely viewed, you can easily see in the high 90s in terms of cache hit ratio. So there's a small percentage of traffic going out to the storage, or directly, the POPs are filling their caches from storage. But there's a cost of delivering from the POP itself, and then there's from the POP itself, and also for uploading from the origin into the CDN POPs. Did I answer?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go do some math on it.
Okay.
Is it possible to use managed CDN endpoints using the SQL API?
not today, but that is part of the offering that we're working on right now. So we want to ensure that pretty much everything that you can do directly from the portal. And this is similar to everything else that we do across Azure, that they're RESTful APIs. And then, of course, we'll put an SDK in front of that. So if you want to use REST, you can go do that. If you want to use it directly like a .NET SDK, you can use that also. But not there yet, but it will be there shortly this year.
Question on the integration back to its Azure websites was listed as one of them.
Yep.
So in terms of configuration, you kind of talk about just kind of turn it on. Can you talk a little bit more about how that works? Does it intelligently figure out what content is so-called static and kind of look at that for you, or is there more configuration?
Today it doesn't, and so long term we want to make it a lot simpler. So what we've seen is that people just turn on the CDN. It's just like I see the option, I'm going to turn it on, and yet if you have a huge amount of long tail content, and you look at the majority of Azure websites, there are not a lot of content flowing through them. There's a lot of huge ones out there, but there's a lot of small ones out there. And if you turn on CDN for it, you can yourself target based on host name what you want to deliver from it. So if you can basically say, I just want all my JPEGs, and the rest of the website goes directly from the origin. So I can just set the directory associated with the domain and just send it out. So you'd have to configure it yourself today. Long term, what we want to look at is being able to provide feedback to customers so that if they configure it incorrectly, where they're just throwing across everything and it's not adding value, that we can provide that info. Or additionally, if you have you don't have the CDN turned on for services where it would make sense, we can actually demonstrate to you and show you that you can potentially see X amount of improvement if you actually did have it turned on. So it's hard from the surface to tell because it has a lot to do with if I just have content, I still need to understand what's the shape of traffic, where are all my clients coming from. Once you have live content coming through, then you can very intelligently start giving feedback. But when someone's first standing up content, it's hard to give those. You can generalize, but it's hard to give very exacts in terms of when you'd see actual performance gains.
Cool. Any other questions? Thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit with us. And we look forward to seeing this roll out, and we hope to see you guys on there. If you have any questions, we'll be here for a few minutes afterwards. You're more than welcome to come on out. And I hope you have a good rest of the show.